Now, here's Michael Smerconish.
At long last, the trial in connection with the killing of Ahmaud Arbery is now underway and drawing a lot of attention. They had difficulty seating a jury. 1,000 folks had to be summoned for jury duty just because so many folks think they already know this case. The Reverend James Major Woodall writes about it for Smerconish.com at a very granular level, meaning as someone who knows the community, Glynn County, and those who are affected. He's the public policy associate of the Southern Center for Human Rights, the founder and CEO of the Major Wish Group, LLC, and also former president of the Georgia NAACP. Reverend Woodall, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so grateful for you.
You know, the procedural history of this is something that people perhaps never knew or have forgotten. And of course, but for the video, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation. What transpired in short order to bring us to this point where there is a prosecution?
Most definitely. I'll start with Ahmaud's mother. Ahmaud's mother from day one understood that there was something just categorically wrong with what had taken place. From meeting with the district attorney at the time, who was Jackie Johnson, who later was defeated, till meeting with the second district attorney, George Barnhill, who, pens this very stark, letter that says, for all intent and purpose, that Ahmaud's murder was justified. And then you have this third DA in which now the video is released and he says, I can't prosecute this case with the resources that I have, and appeals to the state's attorney general, Chris Carr, to be able to find a replacement, in which he does in the Cobb County DA here in the Metro Atlanta area. And so procedurally, you have 4 district attorneys prosecuting this case, of which 2 have already infiltrated the case in the investigatory process to ensure that there is no prosecution of the McMichaels or even the person who took the video himself. And so this is really a failure of a system that claims to be impartial. This is a failure of institutional actors that refuse to actually uphold their obligation to the Constitution. And therefore, there can never be justice for Ahmaud Arbery, even if there's a conviction.
How is it that the video finally did come to light?
Well, the video came to light because Mr. Bryan, who is also on trial, he released it to a local radio station in hopes that this would vindicate the murderers of Ahmaud Arbery. He says, for no uncertain terms, that if you all just saw what we saw, you would understand why we did what we did, which is a telling reality that shows how our communities are engaged with one another in these acts of violence. After that murder, everybody was saying, this is not who we are. This is not what America does. But in actuality, it is. Because they felt so convinced that if only we saw the death of Ahmaud Arbery for our own eyes, that we would understand why they took the actions they took.
In other words, he thought he was doing a solid for the McMichaels. If only people could see this, video, then they would understand how this was all justified. Not only does it lead to the prosecution of the McMichaels, it also leads to his prosecution.
Exactly. And the other reality that, Michael, that we don't talk about is that the district attorneys had the video too from day one. The district attorneys had the video from day one. Institutional actors, officers of the court, constitutional electeds had that same video and said that there was, one, no need for arrest on the first 72 hours of the case. 72 hours of the investigation, not the 7 weeks preceding that investigation once it changed hands. Even with the video, what the whole world saw, 2 people who had the power, the discretion, and the ability to do what we all said needs to be done, they did not do it.
Reverend, as straightforward as you can, what happened here? It's a 12-minute sequence. Those of us who've watched the tape, we see a man who looks like he's Ahmaud Arbery at a construction site, doesn't take anything, doesn't vandalize anything. I don't know if it's accepted and people say, yes, that is him, but regardless, somebody calls 911, you pick up the story. What transpired?
I will use one word to describe what transpired, and it was nothing more than a lynching, in which two white men, who took the law into their own hands and believed that there was a crime being committed. And even if we were to justify that, Ahmaud, was committing a burglary or a break-in, if you will, that's what they called it, a break-in. That's not a felony. And so they're not legal in their ability to conduct the citizen's arrest, which, by the way, we've now since repealed here in the state of Georgia, thanks to the efforts of the Just Georgia Coalition and so many others. But it was a lynching because they corner him in. He's running, and a lot of people talk about him. He's running. I run with Ahmaud, but he wasn't simply just running down the street. He was running for his life. He was running for his life. He runs around the truck hoping to get away. He sees one guy on the truck's bed with a shotgun. The other one has a weapon himself. And so he's literally fighting now for his life. So instead of running away, he can't run away because they've literally chased him down with a white truck. And mind you, you also have to remember there's another truck right behind it who is following this white truck with the McMichaels in it. So there's nowhere for him to go. There's nowhere for him to go other than to escalate his use of force, which, by the way, is legal under Georgia's stand your ground laws. And so Ahmaud does everything in his power to protect his life, and unfortunately, he loses it. But the part that really struck me, and Court TV did a investigatory special on this, the paramedics, the police officers who arrived on the scene, Ahmaud wasn't dead then. They sat above his body. They stood above him as he took his last breath. We talk about George Floyd in his saying, "I can't breathe," but I almost imagine Ahmaud too saying, "I can't breathe, and I just want to go home and see my mama," because his mom that day was going to work, and she told him to be safe before she left. She tells that story all the time, and he just wanted to see his mom one last time, or his sister. But he didn't
the
get
law
that
that was rescinded. The law that was rescinded. What would that have enabled, because it was in effect at the time, the McMichaels to do? In other words, had Ahmaud Arbery, and I'm not saying this is what transpired. I think the video proves that's not what transpired. But had he vandalized, had he stolen, had something happened, and now they saw it in progress, what would they have been able to do?
They still would not have been able to use that law because of a few factors. One, Ahmaud didn't commit any crime in their presence. And so under that law, they would not have been justified in their use of force. And then you also had to have committed a felony. And that's one of the arguments that we use. We said that this law is so ambiguous that no normal person, even persons like Gregory and Travis McMichael, who has used the law and has worked in the district attorney's office, they don't even understand the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor in practice. Yeah, on the law, on paper, you can say, well, this is a felony, this is a misdemeanor. But as it is transpiring before your very eyes, you are not able to discern whether or not that's a felony or not, unless you're just a lawyer who's well trained in that. And secondly, again, going back to the first point, that they didn't see it, that it was a video, and they claimed that somebody called them and said that there was some folks breaking in, and they took it again into their own hands. So that is not a defense that they can use. And quite frankly, I wouldn't expect their attorney to use it, but they got to do what they got to do, which I understand is a part of that process. But however, it's just simply insufficient to claim that they are committing a citizen's arrest when those elements have not been met.
One of the oddities that struck me, the camera at that construction site, how many people it captured who came to take a look. I had no idea that there was such a curiosity or fascination with homes that were under construction. White folk, black folk, they look like they were of a variety of different ages. A lot of people came through that property.
Most definitely. And it's no crime to be curious. There's no crime to look into. Even the property owner himself went on the record and said that he did not commission the McMichaels to do what they did. The property owner, the one who's been, quote unquote, harmed in Ahmaud's actions. Or so allegedly. And so if you got the property owner saying, I didn't tell you all to go and arrest him or kill him, I didn't tell you to do anything. So it even adds insult to injury that they believe that we're that stupid and that dumb to be able to not make these natural conclusions based off the information that we've been provided. And that's why it's so hard to sit and impanel a jury.
I have this. Well, I wanted to ask you about that because it reminds me of George Floyd in that you kind of have to worry about someone who isn't knowledgeable about the case, as in where the heck have they been? And I read a number of the comments from the jury selection process where a lot of people came in and they said absolutely they watched it and they have an opinion in this case. Talk to me about Glynn County and the dynamics of this case being tried there.
Most definitely. And one of the things I would lift up is that you don't necessarily want a person, to your point, that doesn't necessarily have an opinion on the case. What you want is a person as a juror who is able to be impartial to the facts. Take the evidence that's presented before you and make a determination based on the accusations within the indictment. If you can do that, you can be sat as a juror. Now, as it relates to the composition in Glynn County, Brunswick is predominantly African American, but the surrounding cities and municipalities around Brunswick, Georgia, is majority white. And so in Glynn County, where this case is being heard, you have this interesting dynamic between the racial minority in the county versus the racial majority in the city. But the murder itself took place outside of the city's limits. And so therefore, a jury of their peers, the McMichaels being, is that it's going to be a diverse group. It's going to reflect a diversity of political affiliations, racial demographics, economic standing, all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, what you're looking for is, can you look at the facts of this case, the evidence that's presented before the court, and make a determination therein? And that's hopeful. We're hopeful that that's what's happening.
Okay, I have to question you. If Reverend James Major Woodall received a jury summons in this case, and I don't even know if you live in the jurisdiction. I don't know that you do, but could you be fair and impartial? You described it as a lynching when I said, tell me in a straightforward way what went on here. What would you do if you were called and asked to serve in a case like this?
If I were asked to serve in a case like this, I would look at the facts. I would look at the evidence. And that's exactly when we did our own investigation. That's exactly what we did, because the family reached out to us and, asked us to help. And so one of the very initial things that we did when we went down there to meet with the family is we walked through the patterns. And I'll admit, I was initially skeptical because I didn't have all the facts. But when given all of the evidence from the police reports, the incident reports, looking at the 911 tape, listening to the 911 tape, looking at the video, I could no longer be ambiguous in my interpretation of what happened that night. I saw a cover up. I saw a murder. I saw an impeding investigation that refused to be transparent with the family. And so I had to make no other determination than to call it what it was.
I know that we often describe George Floyd in this context because of the significance of that case, but as I think of other high-profile circumstances that we've talked about in the media, it's really the George Zimmerman Trayvon Martin case, isn't it? That's the parallel, because you've got a citizen acting upon the belief that they are able to take the law into their own hands, and the death of a young Black individual is the result.
Most definitely. And it goes even further to the heart of a doctrine called castle doctrine, in which we've seen the expansion of stand your ground. And there's another case here in Georgia that we're fighting right now in Statesboro, the case of Marcus Wilson, who stands his ground. And so what the question at the heart of both of these cases, or really all three of these cases, is, do minorities, do people of color, do African Americans have the same legal protection of being able to protect themselves and defend themselves against racist violence, state violence, and racist vigilantism? Because that's what happened in Trayvon Martin's case. That's what happened in Ahmaud Arbery's case. And that's now what's happening in Marcus Wilson's case.
But so, Reverend, as you know, George Zimmerman was acquitted. George Zimmerman was acquitted in the Trayvon Martin case. And I suspect I'm covering it from a distance. You're right there and know the facts of it very well. I suspect that the way this case will be defended is that they will say that these three individuals believed that they were acting under that law that has since been rescinded, and that in the end, after the confrontation took place, that it was a matter of self-defense. You get the final word before we run out of time.
The question of the day is, what is considered reasonable? If I think it is reasonable use of force, deadly force of that, then you can be acquitted. That's what happened with George Floyd. Fortunately for the case of the McMichaels, I don't think that that's going to be the outcome of the result. But again, we can never determine what's going to happen until it happens.
Thank you so much for your time and also for the analysis that you provided for the website. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you. If I can ever be of service, let me know.
I will do that. The Reverend James Woodall, by the way, read what he wrote. It's posted at Smerconish.com and right now is in all of my social media. You'll learn some things about this case that you do not know.